gravity hazard, but be aware of where your tools are and keep them from either being a tripping hazard or a gravity hazard. Also with the power tools, you have eye danger, so you want to make sure that you have appropriate eyewear on, depending on what you're doing with the power tools. The eyewear is also available, so just ask for it if you don't have eye protection on already. Make sure that you're aware of whether it's you or whether it's someone else using the power tool, that you get your glasses on. And then ear protection, that's going to be mostly for cutting the rail, which happens on the ground. But there can be other things like drilling into stucco that gets very loud. Even just the carrying the rail up to the roof, if they're clanging against each other, wear ear protection as appropriate. And then hand danger, the power tools like the drill, if you are drilling and you hit a nail or something that causes the bit to stop, it might just twist your hand. So be aware of your hands and the potential dangers associated with that. Other hazards of the solar installation are material handling, so lifting, carrying, manipulating heavy objects, including the panels. Good communication is key. Making sure that the people on the bottom confirm every single panel, say you got it before you let go, and then the people on top should say got it.
Are we going to take all the panels up at once and stack them somewhere, or take them up one by one as we install them?
We're probably going to take up half the panels at a time. Like we're going to take up 12 of the panels, stash them, and then take up the other 13 as a separate thing. Just because it's so many panels, we're going to probably break it into stages, but in general we do stash as many panels as we can. That way we can stay on a roll as we're mounting them and not have to wait for someone on the ground. Be slowed down that way. So every job is different. It all depends on if you can safely stash the panels on the roof without messing up the wiring that you have in place, then yeah, that's generally the way we'll do it. So with lifting, you want to be aware of you, and you want to be aware of other people, use good communication. The other hazard as a general category is the elements. So sunlight, I don't know how they can see that, but that's a pretty nasty sunburn. We do offer, we have sunscreen if you forgot to bring some. We have some spray on, we have some lotion type sunscreen, so just ask me if you need sunscreen before you get on the roof. There's the heat, you want to make sure that even if it's a cold day, you want to make sure you're drinking plenty of water, but especially on a hot day, make sure you're staying hydrated. Don't be afraid to take water breaks. No one's going to judge you if you need to go down and take a snack or take a water break to make sure that you are in your best mental state.
We can bring our water up on the roof.
Yeah, I recommend bring water cups. Fortunately, there's the flat roof that we can put water cups, or better yet, a reusable water bottle. And then we will have, I think there's water stage out there. I have water in the truck. So there's going to be chances to refill your water bottles. I also have some disposable water bottles should they be needed. So don't be afraid to ask for water if you need it. You want to be aware of the cold too, and wear gloves if you need them. Just anything associated with the elements. But particularly want to be aware of wind. If it gets really windy, that's not the time to be handing up panels. If we have to wait out a little bit of a mini storm or something, that's what we're going to do, because especially with these 72 cell panels, they're just going to pull like a sail. We want to have as much as possible 2 people maneuvering a panel at a time, and then if it gets windy, just set it down wherever you are. Get it against the roof, and don't let the panel and yourself go for a flight. The rain, we may have some rain tomorrow morning. If that's the case, we're going to start to focus on mounting the combiner box and other things that we can do from the ground, because we're not going to go on the roof when it's wet, when it's unnecessarily slippery. And then lightning, forget about it. If there's lightning, we're not going on the roof, especially not when we're setting up all these ground things that that could act as something that attracts even more lightning. We don't want to be up there if there's a storm. Ladder safety, we want to make sure, it's going to be kind of my job to set up the ladders, but it's kind of everyone's job to be aware of safety and make sure that the ladder is strapped and that it's secure. So in this case, it's secured with a rope, and that it's also an appropriate angle where it's not too steep, not too shallow. If it's too shallow, the bottom of the ladder might slip out. If it's too steep, it's got the potential to fall backwards, or someone could fall off of the ladder more easily, or bang up their knees on the steps. So the appropriate ladder steepness is kind of a 4-to-1 ratio, or another good rule of thumb is if you're standing at the base of the ladder and you stick your hand out, you should be touching the ladder with your feet and with your hands. And that's approximately the angle that you want to use with the ladder, where it's not too steep and not too shallow. And again, it should be tied off, so even if you lose your balance a little bit, you're not going to tilt the whole ladder backwards. The other thing I should mention about the ladder, you want to use an A-frame ladder to get to the roof. You want to, especially if you're carrying tools and stuff, you want to have a ladder that extends 3 feet above, that you can grab onto those rungs as you're transferring your weight from the ladder to the rooftop. You want to be able to hold your hand, and ideally just pass things to someone who's already on the roof rather than trying to carry it up by yourself. The rooftop safety, again, we're going to kind of go through the different steps of the process. So there's installing the flashings, there's going to be drilling involved, there's going to be using the impact driver, so be aware of the power tool safety. We want to pay attention to overhead wires and electrical safety, heavy object handling, not just the panels which you already talked about, but also lifting boxes. If the box is too heavy or too awkward, use 2 people. If it's appropriate to lift with 1 person, make sure you're using good lifting technique where you bend at the knees, keep your back straight, and lift up, keeping the thing that you're lifting as close to your body as possible. And same thing when you're setting it down, but also be aware of pinching your fingers as you set it to the ground. Especially if you're lifting something with 2 people, use good communication so that one person doesn't drop and make you drop the other end on your fingers. The elements we touched on again, but keep yourself, hydrated. Have snacks if you need them. Whatever it is to keep yourself clear-headed. The elements, the wind, the rain, the tool safety. Make sure that you're wearing both your eyewear and ear protection when it comes to cutting the rails. Be aware of how the power tools work. Don't be afraid to ask questions if you're not sure. Even if it's just been explained to you, just say, wait, can you explain that one more time? Make sure that you know exactly what you're doing before you engage with the power tool. And speaking of, at this point, well, unless there's any other questions, are there any other questions about what we've covered so far?
Is there somebody on site that's trained in first aid?
I have a first aid kit. I'm not specifically trained in first aid, but is anyone in this room specifically trained in first aid?
No.
Yeah,
Recently.
we got a couple people. I did take first aid training, but it's out of date. I think it was more than 5 years ago. So, but we do have a very good safety record. We try to take all the precautions that no one gets hurt in the first place, but we do have the first aid kit located on the truck. It's hanging on the wall, so it's always easy to find. So as you walk into the back of the truck, it's hanging from the right side of the wall, and just cut the zip ties, open it up, and get whatever band-aids or bandages you need. Any other last questions?
The combiner box, is it essentially a junction box, or are there other functions going on in that combiner box?
It's pretty much just going to be a junction box. He's talking about there's going to be a box on the roof where we transition from the proprietary end-phase wire that has the 2 line wires in it, and then there's going to be a separate ground wire that's all going to kind of come together in a junction box, and that's where we transition to conduit and more traditional house wiring. It's just a place that it's a watertight box where you can do your wire nuts and crimp the grounds together and transition from one style of wiring to another.
The thing that I find the most confusing is how the power panel decides whether it's going to take power from the solar system or the grid. How does it know when there's enough solar system power coming in that it doesn't need to suck power from the grid? Well, how does it shut on and off from taking power from the grid?
Yeah, so his question was, how does the power panel, either the inverter or the microinverter, know when to send, or are you actually talking about the main service panel? How does the main service panel know where to direct the power, when to send it to the house, when to send it back to the grid? There's nothing super intelligent about it. It's all just connected in parallel. But what happens is the microinverters or the inverters are going to work at a slightly higher voltage than the grid itself. They're always going to stay, like 5 volts higher. And current is always going to flow from the higher potential to the lower potential, so that the lowest potential is going to be the plugs in your walls, the items demanding electricity. So all the electricity is going to flow toward that naturally. That's like the bottom of the river. But once the demand is being met by all the plugs, any excess power is going to go from the slightly higher voltage of the inverter out to the lower voltage of the grid, which again is just a network of all the other houses which have their own plugs which are demanding power.
Okay, that's half my question, but the other half is, how does the power panel know whether to utilize power from the solar system or from the grid? It's why doesn't the panel just say, the hell with the solar system, I'm just taking power from the grid? How does it know which source to take the power from?
Yeah,
I'm not saying how does it know to send it back. I'm saying, how does the panel decide which source to absorb the power from?
Yeah, how does the panel know when to import versus export energy? How does it know if the solar is falling short? How does it know to bring power in?
No. How does it know that it should take power from the solar system at all versus from the grid? In other words, what's telling the panel, okay, there's two sources of power. There's the grid and there's a solar system. How does it know whether to take the power from the grid and ignore the solar system completely or juggle it? How does it know, I'm not saying send it back, I'm saying how does it know that the solar system should have preference over the grid?
It really just comes down to which one has the higher voltage, and voltage is going to flow from higher voltage to lower voltage.
Okay, so it's the same answer. It's the
that's all it is. There's no real decisions being made. Everything is just connected in parallel, and the electricity is going to flow where it's needed from the higher voltage generators.
Okay.
And one interesting point about that is that if the grid is running particularly high, sometimes the microinverters or even a regular inverter will shut down because the microinverters have an operating range too. They can go anywhere from maybe 245 to 260 volts. However, if the grid is already at 255 and it's pushing the microinverters outside their allowable range, they'll actually shut down because for safety reasons, they're only designed to work within a certain operating range, and they always have to be a little bit higher than the grid. And in fact, if you have a chain of microinverters, as you go along the chain, each microinverter has to be just a little bit higher than the one before it, so that power is not flowing into the microinverter, but rather out from the last microinverter back towards the main panel. So when you have particularly long chains, you have to make sure that PG&E is working within their normal range. And I've had customers where we've had to call the power company and say, look, you're not, whether it's PG&E or San Diego or Southern California Edison, the power company is responsible for keeping it within a certain decent range of voltage, and sometimes they do run a little bit high, and you have to make sure that they're running at a reasonable level that the inverters can run a little bit higher. But yeah, no particularly intelligent decisions being made. It's just power flowing from higher potential to lower potential.
Okay.
and going where it's demanded.
This might be out of context right now, you might cover it later, but is there the potential for so many people to be on solar that you won't be selling your power back to the grid?
So there's a concern as more and more people get on solar that everyone's going to be producing power at the same time, and that there's some countries that are ahead of America in terms of solar installations, and they have a problem where the retail value of solar power generated between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock is a negative number. You have to pay them to export the energy out, and the greater percentage of the population goes on solar, the more that becomes a concern, and the more battery solutions are going to have to become a part of the whole thing, where whether it's grid level or whether it's individual level, people are going to need to store their energy during the middle of the day when all the power is being produced and use it when the peak hours happen, which is usually around dinner time. One of the ways that the power companies are subtly encouraging that now is